Grandma, my parents are sending you to a nursing home today, my 8-year-old granddaughter whispered to me. I simply walked out of the house with no destination. What they didn't know was that I was hiding a 17 demigod fortune. What I did next left them in shock. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, the one with the faded blue fabric that Harold had bought me for our 20th anniversary, watching my 8-year-old granddaughter, Harlow, carefully arrange her dolls on the coffee table. The afternoon sun streamed through the lace curtains, creating patterns on the worn carpet that had seen better days. Everything seemed so normal, so peaceful. Harlow had been staying with me for the weekend while Kurt and Avalon went to some charity gala downtown. At least that's what they told me. I suspected it was more about networking than charity, but I kept those thoughts to myself. My son had changed so much since marrying Avalon 5 years ago. Grandma Clarice, Harlow whispered, glancing toward the hallway as if making sure no one could hear us. Can I tell you a secret? I sat down my knitting and gave her my full attention. At 66, I'd learned that when children want to share secrets, you listen. Of course, sweetheart. What is it? She climbed onto my lap, her small arms wrapping around my neck. Her breath was warm against my ear as she whispered, Mommy and Daddy are going to put you in a nursing home today. I heard them talking on the phone last night. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my chest tighten, my hands instinctively gripping the armrests of my chair. What did you hear, honey? Mommy said you're getting too old to live alone and that it's too expensive to keep taking care of you. Harlow's voice was matter-of-fact, the way children repeat things they don't fully understand. Daddy said the place has visiting hours on Sundays. My mind reeled. I stared at this innocent child who had just delivered news that shattered everything I thought I knew about my relationship with my son. Kurt had always been distant since Harold's death 5 years ago. But I never imagined he saw me as such a burden. Are you okay, Grandma? Harlow asked, pulling back to look at my face. You look sad. I forced a smile, though my heart was breaking. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just thinking. But I wasn't fine. Memories flooded back of Kurt as a little boy, running to me when he scraped his knee, asking me to read him stories before bed. When had that loving child turned into someone who could plot to ship his own mother away without even telling her? I thought about Avalon, my daughter-in-law, with her perfectly styled blonde hair and designer clothes that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She'd made it clear from the beginning that she didn't approve of Kurt's overly close relationship with his mother. Every family dinner became a subtle battle, with Avalon making comments about how I was set in my ways or how Kurt worried about me too much. We should get you ready, sweetheart, I told Harlow, gently moving her off my lap. Your parents will be here soon. As Harlow gathered her toys, I walked to my bedroom on unsteady legs. My reflection in the dresser mirror showed a woman who looked every bit of her 66 years. Gray hair pulled back in a simple bun, wrinkles mapping years of worry and loss. Clothes that had seen better decades. No wonder they saw me as a burden. I opened my jewelry box, the one Harold had made for me in his workshop. My fingers found the small key hidden beneath the velvet lining. After Harold's death, I'd told Kurt that his father had left very little money. It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. The front door opened, and I heard Avalon's voice, sharp and impatient. Harlow, get your things. We need to go. I closed the jewelry box quickly and walked back to the living room. Kurt stood by the door, not meeting my eyes. He'd inherited his father's height, but none of his warmth. Avalon checked her phone, clearly eager to leave. Thanks for watching her, Mom, Kurt said, his voice strained. We'll talk soon. The way he said it, with that forced casualness, confirmed everything Harlow had told me. I kissed my granddaughter goodbye, holding her a little longer than usual. I love you, Grandma, she whispered. I love you too, sweetheart, more than you'll ever know. After they left, I stood in the silence of my small house. The walls seemed to close in around me. Pictures of Kurt at various ages stared back at me from every surface. Birthday parties, graduation days, his wedding. Had I been fooling myself all these years, thinking we still had a relationship? I walked to my bedroom and pulled out an old suitcase from under the bed. I packed slowly, deliberately, a few changes of clothes, my medications, Harold's wedding ring that I still wore on a chain around my neck. At the bottom of the suitcase, I placed a small envelope that contained something Kurt had never seen. 20 minutes later, I stood at my front door with my coat and purse. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay here waiting for them to come collect me like an unwanted piece of furniture. The afternoon air was crisp as I walked down the street I'd called home for 30 years. Neighbors waved from their porches, unaware that they might be seeing old Clarice Henderson for the last time. At least the version of Clarice they thought they knew. I reached the bus stop and sat on the worn bench. When the city bus arrived, I climbed aboard without looking back. The driver, a kind-faced woman about my age, smiled at me. "Where to, honey?" "Downtown," I said simply. "First National Bank." As the bus pulled away from my neighborhood, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not sadness or fear, but a strange sense of liberation. Kurt and Avalon thought they knew who I was. They thought they could dispose of me quietly, neatly. They had no idea what they just unleashed. The bus rumbled through familiar streets, past the grocery store where I'd shopped for decades, past the church where Harold and I had been married. But I wasn't the helpless old woman they believed me to be. I'd been protecting them from the truth for 5 years, living modestly, letting them think I was barely scraping by. It was time for that to change. When I walked into First National Bank 30 minutes later, I approached the same teller window I'd visited every month for years. But instead of making my usual small deposit, I asked to speak with the manager. "I need to access my safety deposit box," I told the young man in the expensive suit. "All of them." The bank manager, a polished man named Mr. Davidson, led me through the vault's heavy doors. His demeanor had shifted completely when he saw my account information. The difference in his voice was something I hadn't heard in years. "Mrs. Henderson, we haven't seen you in quite some time," he said, inserting his key alongside mine in the first safety deposit box. "I trust everything has been satisfactory with your accounts?" "Perfectly satisfactory," I replied, lifting the metal box from its lot. Inside lay documents that told a story Kurt had never known, a truth I'd buried alongside his father. I thought back to that day 5 years ago when Dr. Peterson had called with Harold's test results. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, 6 months if we were lucky. Harold had gripped my hand in that sterile office and made me promise something. "Don't tell Kurt about the patents, Clarice." "Not yet. Let him build his own life first." Harold had been a quiet man, a tinkerer who spent hours in our garage workshop. While I raised Kurt and managed our household, Harold invented small things at first. An improved can opener, a better door hinge, a more efficient sprinkler head. He'd file the patents himself, never expecting much. But then came the automatic pet feeder. It started when our neighbor's dog kept getting into our garbage. Harold designed a simple mechanism that would dispense food at set times, keeping animals on schedule. He built a prototype in our garage and thought nothing more of it until Pet contacted him. I remembered the day the first royalty check arrived, $12,000 for a single quarter. Harold had stared at it for an hour before showing it to me. "Clarice, I think we might have something here." We did have something. Over the next 15 years, Harold's patents generated steady income that we invested carefully. Real estate in emerging neighborhoods, blue-chip stocks, municipal bonds, nothing flashy, nothing that would attract attention. When Kurt graduated college and moved in with Avalon, Harold and I made a decision. We would live simply, modestly, the same way we always had. Kurt needed to learn independence to build his own success, without relying on his parents' money. "If he knows we're wealthy, he'll never know what he's truly capable of," Harold had said. "And that woman he's dating, she'll never love him for who he is." Avalon. Even then, Harold had seen through her charm. She'd grown up in privilege, and her interest in Kurt had seemed to spike when she learned he was an engineer with good prospects. If she'd known about Harold's patents, about the investments that had grown quietly in the background, I shuddered to think what might have happened. After Harold's diagnosis, the patents continued generating income, but I honored his wishes and kept the secret. Kurt was building his career, trying to prove himself. I lived on a small portion of the investment income and let the rest accumulate. Now, sitting in the bank's private conference room with my safety deposit boxes spread before me, I wondered if I'd made the right choice. Mr. Davidson had discreetly stepped out to give me privacy. I opened the manila folder that contained my current financial statements, $17,200,000. The number still shocked me even though I'd watched it grow slowly over the years. Harold's automatic pet feeder had spawned a series of related patents: timed dispensers for medications, automated plant watering systems, programmable bird feeders. Each patent generated royalties that I'd reinvested faithfully. My phone buzzed. A text from Kurt. "Mom, we need to talk. Are you home?" I stared at the message. So it was beginning. They'd probably already called a nursing home and made arrangements. In their minds, I was probably just sitting in my armchair, waiting helplessly for whatever decision they'd made about my future. I thought about Harlow's innocent face, the way she'd tried to warn me. That sweet child was the only reason I'd maintained any relationship with Kurt and Avalon at all. Over the years, I'd watched Avalon's true nature emerge. The way she dismissed Kurt's concerns about his father's illness. How she'd forgotten to invite me to Harlow's birthday parties until the last minute. The subtle ways she'd poisoned Kurt against me. "Your mother is so needy," I'd overheard her tell Kurt once. "She calls you constantly. You need to set boundaries." But I hadn't called constantly. I'd called maybe once a week. And even then, I could hear the impatience in Kurt's voice. Avalon had been systematically driving a wedge between us, and Kurt had been too blind to see it. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Avalon. "Clarice, Kurt is worried about you. Please call us back." Worried? Right. They were worried about their timeline being disrupted. Worried that I might somehow complicate their plans. I pulled out another document from the safety deposit box, Harold's will. The real one that our lawyer had prepared. Kurt had never seen this version. The copy I'd shown him after the funeral had been carefully edited, showing only our modest checking account and the house. This will told a different story. It outlined every patent, every investment, every carefully hidden asset. Harold had left everything to me with instructions that it should eventually go to Kurt and Harlow. But there had been a condition. Only when Clarice determines that Kurt has the wisdom and character to handle such responsibility. I'd been waiting 5 years for that wisdom to emerge. Instead, I'd watched my son become increasingly distant, increasingly influenced by a woman who saw family as an inconvenience. The bank's phone on the conference table rang softly. Mr. Davidson's voice came through the intercom. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm sorry to disturb you, but there is a young man here asking about you. Says he's your son." My heart sank. Somehow Kurt had figured out where I'd gone. "Tell him I'm in a meeting and cannot be disturbed." "Of course, ma'am." I gathered the documents quickly and placed them back in the safety deposit box, but I kept one item, a small notebook where Harold had recorded every patent application, every royalty payment, every investment decision. His handwriting filled page after page with the meticulous records of a man building a legacy. On the last page, in Harold's familiar script, was a note dated just weeks before his death. "For Clarice, you'll know when it's time to tell the truth. Trust your instincts. Our grandson deserves better than we had, and Kurt deserves the chance to be the man I know he can be. But some lessons can only be learned the hard way." I closed the notebook and slipped it into my purse. Through the conference room's small window, I could see Kurt in the bank's main lobby, running his hands through his hair in frustration. He was talking to a teller, probably trying to find out what I was doing here. Part of me wanted to walk out there and tell him everything, to explain that his father had been a brilliant inventor, that we'd built a fortune specifically for his and Harlow's future, to show him that I wasn't the helpless burden he'd come to see me as. But Harold's words echoed in my mind. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way. Kurt had made his choice. He'd chosen Avalon's influence over his own mother's well-being. He'd chosen to see me as a problem to be solved rather than a person to be cherished. Now, I would make my choice. I gathered my coat and purse, leaving the safety deposit boxes secured in their vault. When I emerged from the conference room, Kurt was nowhere to be seen. Mr. Davidson approached me with a slight smile. Your son left a few minutes ago, he said. He seemed quite frustrated. Is there anything else we can help you with today, Mrs. Henderson? I thought for a moment. Yes, actually. I'll need to set up some new accounts, and I'll need to speak with someone about estate planning. His eyebrows rose slightly. Of course. Shall I schedule an appointment for later this week? No, I said firmly. Today I have some important decisions to make. The Grand View Hotel wasn't fancy, but it was clean and quiet, and most importantly, it was only 3 miles from Kurt's house. From my corner room on the 3rd floor, I could see the neighborhood where I'd raised my son, where my granddaughter was probably wondering why Grandma had disappeared. It had been 2 days since I'd left the bank with a new checkbook and a plan that was still forming in my mind. 2 days of Kurt calling my house phone over and over, leaving increasingly frantic messages that I listened to from the hotel's business center. Mom, where are you? We need to talk. Avalon is really worried about you. I almost laughed at that last part. Avalon worried about me the way a cat worries about a mouse, only concerned about when it might escape. I'd spent yesterday meeting with Margaret Chin, the private investigator that Mr. Davidson had recommended. Margaret was a small woman in her 50s with shrewd eyes and an unassuming manner that probably made people underestimate her. Perfect for what I needed. I wanted to know everything about my daughter-in-law's spending habits. I told her about daily routines, friendships, and activities when my son wasn't around. I also wanted to know about their financial situation. The real situation. Margaret had nodded without judgment. How deep do you want me to dig? All the way to bedrock. Now I sat in my hotel room waiting for her first report while watching the local news. A story about elder abuse caught my attention, and I felt a familiar knot form in my stomach. Is that what I was? An elderly woman being abused by her own family? My phone rang. Margaret's number. Mrs. Henderson, I have some preliminary information you might find interesting. What did you find? Your son and daughter-in-law are in significant debt. Credit cards maxed out, a second mortgage on the house, car payments on 2 luxury vehicles they can't afford. But that's not the most concerning part. I gripped the phone tighter. What is it? Your daughter-in-law has been researching nursing homes for the past 6 months. Not nice ones. The cheapest facilities she could find, some with serious violations from the state health department. The room seemed to spin around me. 6 months. This hadn't been a sudden decision born of concern for my welfare. This had been a calculated plan. There's more, Margaret continued. She's been telling neighbors that you're becoming increasingly confused and difficult to manage, creating a narrative that would justify their decision. I closed my eyes, remembering the strange looks I'd gotten from Mrs. Patterson next door last week. The way she'd spoken to me slower and louder than usual, as if I were a child. What about my granddaughter? That's where it gets worse. From what I've observed, the child is largely ignored. Left to fend for herself while your daughter-in-law shops and your son works overtime trying to keep up with their expenses. My heart clenched. Poor Harlow, trapped in a house where money mattered more than people. After hanging up with Margaret, I sat staring at the hotel room's beige walls. Harold had been right to keep our wealth secret, but he'd overestimated Kurt's character. My son had grown into someone who could plan to discard his own mother for financial convenience. I opened Harold's notebook again, running my fingers over his careful handwriting. On one page, he'd written, "The automatic pet feeder patent alone should provide for 3 generations, but money without wisdom is just another burden." Wisdom. That's what Kurt lacked and what Avalon had never possessed. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, my blood turned cold. "Grandma, are you okay? Mommy says you're sick and had to go to the doctor. I miss you. Love, Harlow." They were lying to my granddaughter, making her worry that something was wrong with me while they plotted to institutionalize me. I called Margaret back immediately. "I need you to document everything. I want proof of their financial situation. Proof of how they're treating Harlow. Proof of every lie they're telling. Mrs. Henderson, are you planning legal action?" "I'm planning to protect my granddaughter, whatever that takes." That evening, I drove my rental car through my old neighborhood. The house Harold and I had shared for 30 years sat dark and empty. Kurt's house, 2 streets over, glowed with warm light. I parked across the street and watched. Through the large front window, I could see Avalon on her phone, gesticulating wildly. Kurt sat slumped on the couch, his head in his hands. No sign of Harlow. A few minutes later, Avalon threw her phone down and stormed out of the room. Kurt remained on the couch, not moving. Even from a distance, I could see the defeat in his posture.
My phone rang.
Kurt's number. Mom, please answer this time. I know you're upset about something, but we can work it out. Avalon found some really nice places where you'd be comfortable and safe. Safe from what? From living independently in the house I'd called home for decades? From making my own decisions about my own life? I didn't answer. Instead, I watched as he hung up and threw his own phone aside. A light came on in an upstairs window. Harlow's room. I could see her small silhouette moving around, probably getting ready for bed. My heart ached to go to her, to tell her that Grandma was fine and that someone was watching out for her. Avalon reappeared in the living room carrying a laptop. She set it on the coffee table and opened it, angling the screen toward Kurt. Even from across the street, I could see them looking at what were obviously nursing home websites. They were shopping for my future like they were browsing for a new appliance. Kurt pointed at something on the screen and shook his head. Avalon pointed at something else, more insistent. They were arguing about price. I realized it was about how cheaply they could dispose of me. I started the car and drove away before I did something I'd regret. Back at the hotel, I called Margaret again. I need you to accelerate your investigation, and I need you to look into legal options for protecting my granddaughter. What kind of legal options? I want to know what it would take to get custody of her, or at least guaranteed visitation rights that can't be revoked. There was a pause. Mrs. Henderson, that's a significant step. Are you sure? I thought about Harlow's face when she'd warned me about the nursing home, about the text message saying she missed me, about the light in her bedroom window, a little girl probably wondering why the adults in her life kept disappearing. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The next morning brought Margaret's full report, 20 pages of financial records, photographs, and documented conversations that painted a picture of a family in crisis. Kurt and Avalon owed over $200,000 in various debts. The house I'd helped them buy with a secret gift of $50,000 for the down payment was mortgaged to the hilt. Avalon's shopping addiction had spiraled out of control, and Kurt was working 70-hour weeks to try to keep them afloat. But the most damning evidence was the timeline Margaret had constructed. The nursing home research had begun immediately after they'd received a property tax notice on my house. They'd realized that my modest home was worth nearly $400,000 in the current market. They weren't just trying to get rid of a burden. They were planning to sell my house to solve their financial problems. The final page of Margaret's report contained information about Harlow's daily routine. Up at 6:30, makes her own breakfast while her parents sleep in, walks to school alone because Avalon can't be bothered to drive her, and spends afternoons at the neighbor's house because no one is home when school ends. My granddaughter was raising herself. I closed the report and reached for my phone. It was time to call my lawyer. Richard, this is Clarice Henderson. I need to see you today. It's urgent. Of course, Clarice. What's this about? I need to protect my granddaughter from her own parents. And I think it's time they learned exactly who they've been planning to throw away. Richard Petton had been Harold's lawyer for over 20 years, a distinguished man with silver hair and the kind of quiet competence that comes from handling family fortunes for decades. When I walked into his mahogany-paneled office, he stood with the same respect he'd always shown me, but I could see the curiosity in his eyes. Clarice, I have to admit I'm intrigued by your call. You sounded quite determined. I placed Margaret's investigation report on his desk alongside Harold's notebook. Richard, I need you to know something that I've kept hidden for 5 years. Harold didn't leave me nearly as poor as everyone believes. His eyebrows rose slightly, but he remained silent as I opened the notebook to the final tally of our assets. $17,200,000, I said quietly. That's what Harold's patents and our investments are worth today. Richard's composure cracked for just a moment. In all his years of handling wealthy clients, I could see that this revelation had caught him completely off guard. Clarice, I handled Harold's estate. The will I probated showed what I wanted it to show. The version you filed was real, but it didn't include the patents or the investment accounts. Those were in my name only by Harold's design. I explained everything. Harold's decision to keep our wealth secret, my 5 years of living modestly while watching Kurt build his own life, and now the devastating discovery that my son and daughter-in-law were planning to institutionalize me to access my property. Richard listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes. When I finished, he leaned back in his leather chair. What do you want to do, Clarice? First, I want to protect Harlow. I need to know my legal options for ensuring I can see her regularly, regardless of what her parents decide about me. That's tricky. Grandparents' rights vary by state. But if we can demonstrate that you have an established relationship with the child and that cutting off contact would harm her welfare,
I can demonstrate that.
8 years of birthday parties, sleepovers, school events. I have photos, cards she's made me, everything.
Good.
What else? I took a deep breath. I want to buy the house next to Kurt and Avalon's, the one with the for sale sign. I want to be close enough to watch over Harlow, without their permission. Richard made another note. That's certainly within your rights. Anything else? I want to set up a trust fund for Harlow that her parents can't touch. Something substantial that will be available when she turns 25. How substantial? $5 million. Richard's pen stopped moving. Clarice, that's nearly a third of your entire estate. Harlow is my future, Richard. She's the only person in that family who still has a pure heart. I want to make sure she never has to depend on anyone the way they're trying to make me dependent. He nodded slowly. I can draft the trust documents. Is there anything else? I hesitated, then pulled out the most difficult part of my plan. I want to make a new will, one that Kurt and Avalon will never expect. How so? If something happens to me before Harlow turns 18, I want her care and the management of her trust to go to my sister Patricia in Oregon. Kurt gets nothing until he proves he can be the father and man his daughter deserves. Richard set down his pen entirely. Clarice, that's a dramatic step. You're essentially disinheriting your only child. No, I'm giving him a chance to earn his inheritance through character instead of birthright. Harold always said money without wisdom was just another burden. Kurt needs to learn wisdom first. And if he never does... I thought about Harlow's innocent face, about the lies they were telling her, about the nursing homes Avalon was researching. Then Harlow will inherit everything when she turns 30. At least one person in this family will understand the value of what Harold built. Richard spent the next hour drafting documents while I sat in his conference room, staring out at the city where I'd spent my entire adult life. It felt surreal to be making decisions about millions of dollars while my son thought I was a penniless burden. My phone buzzed. A text from Kurt. Mom, please come home. We're all worried sick. Harlow keeps asking where you are. The mention of Harlow's name made my chest tighten. I typed back, I'm fine. Taking some time to think. His response came immediately. Think about what? If this is about the nursing home discussion, we can look at other options. We just want what's best for you.
I stared at the message.
Even now, he couldn't bring himself to be honest.
It wasn't about what was best for me. It was about what was convenient for them.
The documents are ready, Richard announced, returning to the conference room with a stack of papers. The trust fund for Harlow, the new will, and I've also prepared a power of attorney that ensures no one can make medical or financial decisions for you without your explicit consent. Thank you. I signed each document carefully, my signature sealing a future that Kurt couldn't imagine. There's one more thing, Richard said. The house next to your son's. I called the listing agent. The owners are motivated to sell quickly due to a job relocation. They'll accept a cash offer significantly below asking price. How significantly? The asking price is $485,000. They'll take $420,000 for a cash offer that can close within 2 weeks. I didn't hesitate. Make the offer. An hour later, I was the owner of the house at 247 Maple Street, directly next door to my son's family. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were planning to move me into a nursing home while I was buying the house next door. That evening, I drove to my new property with the keys in my hand. It was a charming two-story colonial with a big front porch and a backyard that connected to Kurt's property line. From the upstairs windows, I could see directly into Harlow's bedroom. As I stood in the empty living room, I heard voices from next door. Through the thin walls, I could hear Kurt and Avalon arguing. "She's been gone for 4 days, Kurt. 4 days." People are starting to ask questions. I know, but what am I supposed to tell them? That my mother disappeared because she found out we were planning to put her in a nursing home. You weren't supposed to let her find out. This is a disaster. I moved closer to the wall, my heart pounding. "Maybe we should just drop the whole thing," Kurt said, his voice tired. "Maybe we can figure out another way to handle our finances." "Are you insane?" Avalon's voice was sharp with anger. "Do you know how much debt we have? Your mother's house is our only way out of this mess. If we don't sell it, we're going to lose everything. But if she's really missing, if something happened to her..." "Nothing happened to her. She's probably staying with some friend trying to make us worry. She'll come back when she gets tired of playing games." There was a pause, then Kurt's voice quieter now. "What if she doesn't come back? Then we file a missing person report and eventually have her declared incompetent. Either way, we get control of her assets." I stepped back from the wall, my hands shaking. Avalon wasn't just planning to institutionalize me. She was prepared to have me declared incompetent if I refused to cooperate. My phone rang, startling me in the empty house. Margaret's number. "Mrs. Henderson, I have an update you need to hear immediately." "What is it?" "Your daughter-in-law met with a lawyer today, a lawyer who specializes in elder care and conservatorship proceedings." My blood turned cold. "What does that mean?" "It means they're preparing to have you declared mentally incompetent if you don't comply with their nursing home plan. They're building a case that you're suffering from dementia or some other cognitive decline that makes you unable to care for yourself." I sank into the window seat, looking across the yard at the house where my granddaughter was probably doing her homework alone while her parents plotted my legal destruction. "There's more," Margaret continued. "The lawyer advised them to document instances of your erratic behavior. They're going to start creating a paper trail that paints you as confused and potentially dangerous to yourself." "How do you know all this?" "The lawyer's secretary is my cousin. She's horrified by what she overheard and wanted someone to warn you." I closed my eyes, feeling the full weight of their betrayal. This wasn't just about money anymore. They were prepared to destroy my reputation, my autonomy, my very identity to get what they wanted. "Mrs. Henderson, are you still there?" "Yes," I said quietly. "I'm here." "And Margaret?" "Yes. Tomorrow morning, I want you to schedule a meeting with Kurt and Avalon. Tell them I'm ready to come home and discuss their concerns about my living situation." "Are you sure that's wise? After what I just told you?" I stood up and walked to the window, overlooking their backyard. In Harlow's bedroom window, I could see my granddaughter's silhouette as she sat at her desk. They think they're dealing with a confused old woman who doesn't understand what's happening to her. It's time they learned exactly who they've been underestimating. I arrived at Kurt's house at exactly 2 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, carrying the same worn purse I'd had for 10 years and wearing the same modest coat that had made Avalon wrinkle her nose at family gatherings. To them, I looked like the same helpless woman who had disappeared 5 days ago. They had no idea that the woman standing on their porch now owned the house next door and had $17 million in assets they couldn't touch. Kurt opened the door before I could knock, his face a mixture of relief and barely controlled anger. "Mom, thank God. Where have you been?" "We've been worried sick." The lie came so easily to him that I almost felt sorry for the man he'd become. "I needed some time to think," I said simply, stepping into the foyer. The house still smelled like Avalon's expensive perfume and the fresh flowers she bought weekly to maintain appearances. Avalon appeared from the living room, her smile as artificial as her highlighted hair. "Clarice, we were so frightened something had happened to you. You can't just disappear like that without telling anyone." "I'm 66 years old, Avalon. I don't need permission to leave my own house." Her smile faltered slightly. "Of course not. We just worry about you living alone at your age." Harlow came running down the stairs, launching herself into my arms. "Grandma, I missed you so much. Mommy said you were sick." I held her tight, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. I'm not sick, sweetheart.
I'm perfectly fine.
Over Harlow's head, I saw Avalon and Kurt exchange a look. Their first lie had already been exposed. Harlow, why don't you go play in your room while the adults talk? Avalon said, her voice tighter now. Can I stay with Grandma? No, sweetheart, I said gently. I need to talk to your parents alone. But I'll come say goodbye before I leave. After Harlow reluctantly went upstairs, the three of us sat in the living room. I chose Harold's old recliner, the one Kurt had moved here after his father's death. It felt appropriate somehow, having Harold's presence for what was about to unfold. Mom, Kurt began, leaning forward with his hands clasped. We need to discuss your living situation. Avalon and I have been researching some really nice facilities where you'd have people around, activities, medical care if you need it. You mean nursing homes? Avalon stepped in smoothly. Assisted living communities, places designed for active seniors who want to maintain their independence while having support available. I pulled Margaret's investigation report from my purse and set it on the coffee table. You mean places like Sunset Manor, the one with the health code violations, or perhaps Golden Years Care, where the state found evidence of patient neglect? Both of them stared at the document. Kurt reached for it, but I held up my hand. Don't touch that yet. We have other things to discuss first. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recording app, setting it on the table between us. I want to make sure we're all clear about what's being discussed here. Mom, you don't need to record, Kurt started. Actually, I do. You see, I know about your financial situation. I know you owe over $200,000 in various debts. I know you've been researching nursing homes for 6 months, not 5 days. And I know you've already spoken to a lawyer about having me declared incompetent. The color drained from Avalon's face. Kurt's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. How do you, Avalon began, how do I know? Because unlike what you apparently think, I'm not a senile old woman who can be easily manipulated. I reached into my purse again and pulled out a business card. Margaret Chun, private investigator. Very thorough work. Kurt found his voice. You hired a private investigator? Mom, that's paranoid behavior. Maybe we should have Dr. Patterson take a look at you. I laughed, a sound that seemed to echo in the suddenly quiet room. Paranoid? Kurt, your wife met with an elder care attorney yesterday to discuss having me committed against my will. I'd say my paranoia was perfectly justified. Avalon shot to her feet. This is ridiculous. We're trying to help you, and you're treating us like criminals. Sit down, Avalon. Something in my tone must have surprised her, because she actually obeyed. Now, I continued, let's talk about what you really want. You want to sell my house to pay off your debts. You want me out of the way so you can access what you think is my only asset. That's not, Kurt began. I held up my hand again. I'm not finished. You've been lying to Harlow, telling her I'm sick when I'm perfectly healthy. You've been spreading rumors in the neighborhood about my mental state, and you've been planning to put me in the cheapest facility you could find while you profit from my property. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking on the mantel. But here's what you don't know, I said. Reaching into my purse one final time, I pulled out Harold's notebook and my bank statements. You don't know who you've really been planning to destroy. I opened the notebook to the first page and began reading aloud. Patent number 874532. Automatic pet feeding system filed by Harold Henderson. March 15, 2003. Current annual royalties $847,000. Kurt's eyes widened. What are you talking about? I turned the page. Patent number 956498. Programmable medication dispenser. Filed by Harold Henderson. August 22, 2008. Current annual royalties $623,000. Mom, I don't understand. Patent number 9,834,771. Smart irrigation controller filed by Harold Henderson, January 4, 2011. Current annual royalties $891,000. I closed the notebook and opened my bank statement, turning it so they could see the bottom line. Current total assets $17,200,000. The silence that followed was deafening. Avalon's face had gone completely white. Kurt stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. "That's impossible," Avalon whispered. "You live in that tiny house. You clip coupons. You buy generic groceries. I live modestly because your father asked me to." He wanted Kurt to build his own success without relying on family money. He wanted to see what kind of man his son would become. I looked directly at Kurt. "Now I know. Mom, if this is real, why didn't you tell me? Why did you let us struggle when you could have helped?" "I did help. The $50,000 you think came from your father's life insurance for your house down payment. That was me. The inheritance you received when your grandmother died. Also me. I've been quietly supporting you for years, hoping you'd develop the character to handle real responsibility." Avalon finally found her voice. "If you're so wealthy, then why are you living like a pauper?" "Because wealth without wisdom is meaningless. Your father understood that. Unfortunately, neither of you do." I stood up, gathering my papers. "Here's what's going to happen. I've purchased the house next door to you. I'll be moving in next week." "You what?" Kurt's voice cracked. "I'll be close enough to maintain a relationship with Harlow regardless of your wishes. I've also established a $5 million trust fund for her education and future, which neither of you can touch." Avalon looked like she might faint. $5 million? "As for the two of you," I continued, "you have a choice. You can apologize for your behavior, commit to being better parents to Harlow, and perhaps we can rebuild some kind of relationship, or you can continue down this path, in which case you'll discover that people with $17 million have very good lawyers." Kurt stood up, his hands shaking. "Mom, we made a mistake. We were desperate. We didn't know what else to do. If we'd known about Dad's money, if you'd known about the money, you would have been hovering around me for years, waiting for me to die so you could inherit, just like you're doing now. Except you were planning to speed up the process." Avalon's composure finally snapped. "This is insane. You can't just buy the house next door and spy on us. We have rights as parents." "Yes, you do. And I have rights as a grandmother. I also have the resources to protect those rights, which you apparently forgot when you were planning to have me declared incompetent." I moved toward the stairs. "I'm going to say goodbye to Harlow now." Avalon looked up at me with tear-filled eyes. "If you ever lie to her about me again, if you ever try to poison her against me the way you've poisoned Kurt, you'll discover that $17 million can buy a lot of legal trouble for people who threaten my granddaughter's well-being." I climbed the stairs, leaving them sitting in their living room, surrounded by the wreckage of their assumptions about the helpless old woman they'd tried to discard. Harlow was in her room, coloring at her desk. She looked up when I knocked on her doorframe. "Grandma, are you leaving again?" I sat on her bed and patted the space beside me. She climbed up and snuggled against my side. "I'm not leaving, sweetheart. I'm moving into the house right next door, so I can see you whenever you want." Her eyes lit up. "Really? The pretty house with the big porch? Really? And Harlow?" "Yes. If your parents ever tell you that Grandma is sick or confused or can't take care of herself, I want you to remember this conversation. I want you to remember that Grandma is perfectly fine and will always be here for you." She nodded seriously. "I'll remember." "Good girl. Now I need to go take care of some moving arrangements, but I'll see you very soon." As I walked back downstairs, I could hear urgent whispers from the living room. Kurt and Avalon were hunched over her laptop, probably researching whether what I'd told them was even possible. They were about to learn that it was not only possible, but that their attempt to control me had backfired in ways they couldn't have imagined. I let myself out without saying goodbye to them. They had a lot to think about, and I had a new life to begin. 6 months later, I was sitting on my new front porch, watching Harlow practice riding her bicycle in my driveway. The house at 247 Maple Street had become everything I'd hoped it would be, a sanctuary where my granddaughter could come whenever she needed refuge from the tension next door. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. The first few weeks after my revelation had been particularly difficult. Kurt had tried to apologize, stumbling through conversations about how he'd gotten confused and let financial stress cloud his judgment. Avalon had been silent for days, barely speaking to anyone, probably calculating how much money she'd lost when their plan collapsed. But children are resilient, and Harlow had adapted quickly to having Grandma next door. She'd come over after school most days, doing her homework at my kitchen table while I prepared snacks. We'd planted a garden together in the backyard, something I'd never had time for when I was working so hard to maintain the illusion of financial struggle. "Grandma, look," Harlow called out, pedaling past without holding on to the handlebars. "No hands. I see you, sweetheart. You're getting so good at that." The front door of Kurt's house opened, and he walked across the yard toward us. These visits had become routine over the past few months. At first, they'd been awkward attempts at reconciliation. Now, they were simply a father checking on his daughter and slowly rebuilding a relationship with his mother. "Hey, Mom," he said, settling into the wicker chair beside mine. "How is Harlow today?" "Perfect as always. She got an A on her science project about plant growth, the one we worked on together using our garden." Kurt nodded, watching his daughter with a mixture of pride and something that looked like regret. "She seems happier lately. Children thrive when they feel secure and loved without conditions." He winced slightly at the implied criticism, but didn't argue. We'd had several difficult conversations over the past months, and Kurt was slowly coming to understand how his marriage had changed him, how Avalon's influence had gradually eroded his relationship with his family. "Avalon wants to talk to you," he said quietly. "About what?" "She wants to apologize. Really apologize, not just say the words because she thinks she has to." "And you believe her?" Kurt sighed, running his hands through his hair in the gesture I remembered from his childhood. "I think she's finally realized what we almost lost, what we almost threw away." Through the window of Kurt's house, I could see Avalon watching us from the kitchen. She'd lost weight over the past months, and her designer clothes had been replaced with simpler outfits. Whether that was due to financial constraints or a genuine change in priorities remained to be seen. "I'm not opposed to talking with her," I said carefully. "But Kurt, you need to understand that trust isn't rebuilt overnight. What you and she plan to do to me, that changes things permanently." "I know, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but maybe for Harlow's sake, we can find a way forward." Harlow rode up to the porch, breathless and grinning. "Daddy, did you see me riding with no hands?" "I did, princess. You're getting really good at that bike." She leaned the bicycle against the porch railing and climbed the steps. "Grandma, can I show Daddy the photo album we made?" "Of course, sweetheart." While Harlow ran inside to fetch the album, Kurt and I sat in comfortable silence. It wasn't the easy relationship we'd once had, but it was progress. "She's made 3 photo albums since I moved in," I told him. "One about our garden, one about our cooking adventures, and one about all the places we want to visit together when she's older. You're giving her stability, something she wasn't getting at home." "That's changing, though. I've noticed Avalon spending more time with her lately." Kurt nodded. "The marriage counselor suggested we focus on family activities instead of individual pursuits. It's been eye-opening." Harlow returned with a thick album bound in purple construction paper. "This is the one about our garden, Daddy. Look, here's the first day when we planted seeds, and here's last week when we harvested tomatoes." As she flipped through the pages, pointing out each stage of growth, I watched Kurt's face. He was seeing his daughter in a way he perhaps hadn't before, not as a responsibility to be managed, but as a person with her own interests and enthusiasm. "This is amazing, Harlow. You and Grandma have been busy. We're going to make jam next week with the strawberries. Grandma says we can give some to the neighbors." "That sounds wonderful." After Harlow went inside to wash her hands for dinner, Kurt turned to me with a serious expression. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." "All right. Do you think I can be a good father?" "Really, or is it too late?" The question caught me off guard. In all our conversations over the past months, Kurt had been defensive, apologetic, or resigned. This was the first time he'd asked for my honest assessment. "You were a loving child, Kurt. You had empathy and kindness. You stood up for other kids who were being bullied. You cried when our dog died and insisted we hold a proper funeral for him." He smiled slightly at the memory. That boy is still inside you somewhere. The question is whether you're willing to let him resurface, or whether you're going to let fear and financial pressure continue to drive your decisions. What about Avalon? Do you think she can change? I considered the question carefully. I think people can change when they truly want to. But change has to come from within, not from external pressure or consequences. The front door of Kurt's house opened again, and this time Avalon walked across the yard. She moved slowly, as if each step required courage. "Clarice," she said when she reached the porch, "could I speak with you privately?" I looked at Kurt, who nodded and stood up. "I'll go help Harlow get ready for dinner." After he left, Avalon sat in the chair he'd vacated. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "I owe you an apology," she finally said. "Not the kind I gave before, when I was still hoping to salvage something for myself. A real apology."
I'm listening.
I was raised to believe that financial security was the most important thing in life. My parents divorced when I was 12 because of money problems, and I watched my mother struggle for years afterward. When I met Kurt, he seemed stable, responsible, someone who could provide security. She paused, looking across at the house where we could see Kurt and Harlow in the kitchen window. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that there's a difference between financial security and greed. I forgot that Kurt wasn't just a provider, he was a person. And I completely ignored the fact that you weren't just an obstacle to my plans. You were his mother. What changed your mind? Avalon was quiet for a long moment. Watching Harlow with you, seeing how happy she is here, how she lights up when she talks about your time together, I realized that I'd been so focused on what I wanted for her future that I was ignoring what she needed in the present. And what does she need? Love without conditions. Attention without distractions. Adults who put her well-being ahead of their own convenience. I studied Avalon's face, looking for signs of manipulation or calculation. But her eyes were clear, and her voice held a steadiness I'd never heard before. "The nursing home plan," I said. "That was your idea."
Yes.
"And I'm ashamed of that." I convinced myself that it was practical, that it made financial sense. But the truth is, I saw you as competition for Kurt's attention and resources. I wanted you out of the way. And now I understand that family isn't a zero-sum game. Your relationship with Kurt and Harlow doesn't diminish mine. It enriches theirs, which enriches mine. Harlow appeared in the doorway.
Grandma.
"Daddy says dinner is ready. Can you eat with us?" I looked at Avalon, who nodded slightly. "I'd like that, sweetheart." As we walked across the yard to Kurt's house, Avalon said quietly, "I don't expect forgiveness right away. I know I have to earn it, but I hope you'll give me the chance to try." "We'll see," I replied. Actions speak louder than words. Dinner was a revelation. Instead of the tense, surface-level conversations I remembered from before, we talked about Harlow's school projects, her friends, her dreams of becoming a veterinarian. Kurt and Avalon listened to her, really listened, asking follow-up questions and showing genuine interest in her answers. After dinner, Harlow insisted on showing her parents the photo albums we'd made. As she narrated each picture, I watched the family dynamic slowly shift. They were learning to see each other clearly, perhaps for the first time. Later, as I prepared to leave, Kurt walked me to the door. "Mom," he said quietly, "I want you to know that I've been thinking about Dad a lot lately, about the choices he made, the man he was. And I think I understand now why he kept the patent secret. He was trying to teach me something about earning things rather than inheriting them. What do you think you've learned?" Kurt looked back toward the living room where Avalon was helping Harlow organize her photo albums. "That the most valuable things in life can't be bought. They have to be built day by day through trust and respect and genuine care for each other." Your father would be proud to hear you say that. Do you think there's hope for us, for our family? I thought about Harold's words in his notebook. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way. Kurt had certainly learned his lessons the hard way, but he was learning them. There's always hope, Kurt, as long as people are willing to do the work of becoming better. Walking back to my house that evening, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. The front porch light was on, welcoming me home to a place that was truly mine. In my mailbox was a hand-drawn card from Harlow. Thank you for being the best grandma ever. Inside the house, I made myself a cup of tea and sat in Harold's chair, which I'd moved from storage. His notebook lay open on the side table to the page where he'd written about wisdom and wealth. You were right, Harold, I said aloud. Money without wisdom is just another burden. But wisdom without the power to protect the people you love is just wishful thinking. The house next door was quiet now. A family learning to rebuild itself on a foundation of honesty instead of desperation. It wouldn't be easy, and there would be setbacks. But for the first time in 5 years, I believed there was hope. My phone buzzed with a text from Harlow. Good night, Grandma. I love you. I smiled and typed back, I love you too, sweetheart. Sweet dreams. Outside my window, the two houses sat side by side in the darkness, connected now, not just by proximity, but by the slow, careful work of rebuilding trust. Harold's legacy wasn't just the money he'd left behind. It was the wisdom to know when to reveal it and how to use it to protect what truly mattered. Family wasn't about blood or obligation. It was about choice, about choosing to love and protect each other even when it wasn't easy. And sometimes it was about having the strength to set boundaries that force the people you love to become better versions of themselves. I was no longer the helpless woman they'd tried to discard. I was Clarice Henderson, guardian of my granddaughter's future and keeper of my late husband's wisdom. And I was finally truly home. Now, I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. Thank you for watching until here. Please subscribe the channel.